Between Sound and Silence. Chapter 1. The Visitor. It was the sound of the sea that woke him, not the crash of waves, but the slow, deliberate breathing of the tide as it crept closer to the shore. A sound both alive and ancient. Dr. Nathan Ellery lay still, listening. Some mornings, he imagined the ocean was speaking, saying things he could almost understand, if only he had stayed awake longer the night before. He turned his head toward the window. Pale light seeped through the curtains, the color of old paper. The house was quiet except for the wind tapping somewhere near the chimney. He sat up, bones protesting, and waited for the room to stop moving. At 72, mornings arrived like unwelcome reminders. He reached for his glasses on the nightstand and caught sight of the stack of essays beside them, half-graded, abandoned after midnight. The students at the college still called him Professor Ellery, though he'd been officially retired for almost 3 years. The title had outlasted the paycheck. He smiled faintly. Habit was harder to retire than a man. Downstairs, the kettle screamed before the water boiled. He poured it anyway, watching the steam rise and vanish. Outside, gulls wheeled in the gray air, their cries sharp and lonely. He'd bought this cottage on the Maine coast to find peace. Instead, he'd found silence. The phone rang once, a dry, brittle sound in the empty house. He hesitated before answering, already certain it would be someone asking him to come back, to teach one more seminar, to write one more recommendation letter for a student he barely remembered. It wasn't. Dr. Ellery? A woman's voice. Young, uncertain. Yes. My name's Claire Mercer. I'm sorry to call so early. You don't know me. I found your number in one of my father's papers. He frowned. Your father? Yes. He passed away last month. I think you might have known him, Robert Mercer. He taught philosophy at Haverford. Ellery closed his eyes. A long breath escaped him. Robert Mercer, he repeated quietly. The name stirred something deep and unsteady, like dust rising in sunlight. Yes, he said. I knew him very well. Claire spoke carefully, as if each word might break. She said she was sorting through her father's notebooks and letters. Among them, she'd found a sealed envelope with Ellery's name written in a slanted hand. I thought maybe I should send it to you, she said. Or maybe I should read it first. There was a pause. Ellery heard her breathing, thin and uncertain. No, he said finally. Don't read it. Bring it. I live in Boston. Then it's not far. I could come this weekend. That would be fine. She thanked him, politely, distantly, and hung up. He stood for a moment, holding the receiver, listening to the soft hum of the disconnected line. Robert Mercer had been dead for 30 years. The rest of the day drifted past like fog. Ellery went through his rituals, tea, reading, the long walk along the beach, but everything carried a faint charge, a kind of static. By late afternoon, he found himself standing in his study, looking at an old photograph framed above the desk. It showed 3 men on a campus lawn, squinting into the sun. Himself, Robert Mercer, and a woman, Anna Lowell. The photograph was from 1978, the year the 3 of them had spent at the university in Edinburgh, a year that had changed everything. He touched the edge of the frame. What are you trying to tell me, Robert? He murmured. The photograph had no answer. On Friday evening, the sky burned orange over the water and then went quickly to black. Ellery lit a fire in the small stone hearth and sat waiting, though she hadn't said exactly what time she'd arrive. He tried reading, but found the words sliding off the page. At 8:30, headlights swept across the window. A car door slammed. He rose, smoothing his sweater, heart beating faster than he liked to admit. She was younger than he expected, mid-30s, maybe. Dark coat, hair pinned back, eyes the same pale green as her father's. I hope I'm not too late, she said. Not at all. He led her inside, offered tea, gestured toward the chair by the fire. She moved with the stiff politeness of someone trying to behave in a stranger's house. They spoke first of small things, the drive, the weather, the sea. Then, at last, She reached into her bag and placed a worn envelope on the table. His name, Nathan Ellery, written in Robert's careful script. Nothing else. He stared at it for a long moment. "I didn't open it," she said quickly. "I thought that would be wrong." "You were right." He picked it up, felt the weight of it. Light, but not empty. A letter can carry more than words. He broke the seal slowly. The paper inside was yellowed and thin. Claire sat motionless, watching him read. "Nathan, if you're reading this, then the years have done what we never thought they would, outlasted us. There's something I never told you about Anna. Something that belonged to her, but became mine. And now, I suppose, it must become yours." Ellery felt a tightness in his chest. The words swam. He stopped reading aloud. Claire waited, but he said nothing. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it back into the envelope. "Nothing," he said. "At least, nothing you need to worry about." Her brow furrowed. "But, please." His tone was gentle but final. "Not tonight." They sat in silence. The fire cracked softly. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. "Finally," she said, "I don't really remember him. My father. Not the way I wanted to." Ellery looked at her, really looked, and saw how much she carried of both parents. The quiet thoughtfulness of Robert, the intensity that had once belonged to Anna. "Memories are cruel things," he said. "They come when you least expect them, and never when you need them." She smiled faintly. "You sound like him." "God help me." They both laughed, and for a moment the heaviness in the room lifted. When she left the next morning, the envelope was still on the desk. She thanked him again, promised to write, and disappeared into the gray light. He watched her car wind up the hill until it vanished. Then he returned to the study, sat down, and unfolded the letter once more. There was a second page he hadn't read, a smaller one, folded tightly within the first. "If you ever find her, tell her I kept the promise. And tell her the thing she left behind is safe. You'll know where to look." Below that, a single line, a place name written in Robert's faded hand. Glen Aird, Scotland. He sat very still. The house creaked as if it, too, were listening. Scotland. He hadn't said the word aloud in decades. Outside, the wind rose, and the sea began its slow breathing again. The same patient rhythm that had woken him that morning. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, long and mournful. Ellery folded the letter and stared into the fire until the paper blurred. He thought of Anna, of promises made on rain-slicked cobblestones, of things left unsaid. He rose, went to the window, and watched the ocean. The tide was coming in fast now, erasing the line between sea and land. "Glen Aird," he whispered. He hadn't planned to travel anywhere again. But suddenly, the house felt smaller than it ever had before. Chapter 2. The Map of Silence. The envelope lay open on the desk for 3 days before Ellery touched it again. He tried, as he always did, to reason his way through the past, to find logic in the pattern of memory. But memory had never obeyed logic. It obeyed feeling. And feeling was the one subject he had spent his life avoiding. By the fourth morning, the air in the cottage had turned damp. The sea mist pushed through every crack, leaving the wallpaper clammy under his fingers. He decided, finally, that he could not stay. He told himself it was curiosity, but he knew better. He began to pack, slowly, methodically, as if order could disguise what he was really doing. When he came to the old leather satchel, the one he hadn't opened in years, he paused. Inside was a folded map of the Scottish Highlands, its creases soft with age. He traced a finger over the faint lines of roads and lochs until he found the word that had haunted him since the letter, Glen Aird. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "So that's where you hid her secret, Robert." By evening, he had a ticket to Edinburgh. The flight left in 2 days. He called no one, not even the college secretary who still sent him invitations to faculty luncheons he never attended. He simply wrote a note on the kitchen counter, "Gone for a few weeks. Don't water the plants." Though there were no plants to water, he left the fire unlit that night. The sea was loud and restless, as if impatient for him to go. The airport was its usual theater of movement, rolling suitcases, dull announcements, voices spilling into one another. He found it oddly comforting. At his age, anonymity was the purest form of freedom. No one cared where he was going or why. On the plane, he sat by the window, hands folded over the map. When the engines lifted him into the air, he felt something between grief and relief, as though the ground itself had been the thing holding him back. The flight attendant offered him tea. He declined. Outside, clouds drifted like continents of smoke. He thought of Anna, her voice, her quick laughter, the way she used to scold him for overthinking everything. "You treat emotions like books," she'd once said, half amused. "You read the ending before you start the story." He'd never told her she was right. Scotland greeted him with rain. Fine, persistent rain that seemed to come not from the sky, but from the air itself. He took a train north from Edinburgh, watching the landscape shift from gray stone to green hills, from cities to scattered farms. At Inverness, he rented a small car, an old model that coughed in protest whenever he changed gears. The road to Glen Aird wound through narrow valleys and over one-lane bridges, where sheep stood unmoving until he honked. It was late afternoon when he finally saw it. A small village clinging to the edge of a loch, surrounded by dark pines and low mist. A single church spire rose above the rooftops. He parked near a sign that read "Welcome to Glen Aird, population 612, and sat for a moment, staring. He had been here before. Once. A lifetime ago. He found a room at the Lochview Inn, a squat building with a slanted roof and the smell of peat smoke in the hallways. The innkeeper, a woman in her 50s with wind-burned cheeks, handed him a brass key. "Not many visitors this time of year," she said. "Business or pleasure?" Ellery hesitated. "Memory," he said. She laughed softly. "That's the worst kind." He smiled, but there was truth in her tone that unsettled him. That night, he unpacked his bag and laid the letter on the small wooden table. He read it again, slowly, letting each word sink into him like rain into stone. "If you ever find her, tell her I kept the promise. And tell her the thing she left behind is safe." He looked up at the dark window. His reflection stared back, older, thinner, uncertain. What had Anna left behind? And why had Robert, of all people, been the one to guard it? He couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he went out walking. The village slept under a low mist. The streetlights buzzed faintly. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then fell silent. He followed the curve of the road toward the loch, where the water caught what little moonlight there was. The smell of wet earth and peat filled the air. On the far side of the shore, a small chapel stood half hidden among the trees. He remembered it, the place they'd come one summer evening, Anna laughing, Robert serious as always. There had been an argument. He couldn't recall the words, only the sound of her footsteps walking away, the echo of her anger against the stones. Now the chapel looked deserted. A single window glowed faintly from within. He crossed the narrow path and pushed the door. It gave with a sigh. Inside, a woman knelt by a pew, polishing the brass candlesticks. She turned, startled. "Sorry," Ellery said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "That's all right." Her accent was soft Highland. "We don't get many visitors after dark. I used to know someone here," he said. "A long time ago." The woman straightened, studying him with mild curiosity. "Names?" "Anna Lowell," he said. "She was here in the late 70s, with a man named Robert Mercer." The woman frowned, then nodded slowly. I remember hearing of her. She stayed with the MacLeods, up by the old estate road. Left suddenly, I think. Folks said she went south." Ellery felt his throat tighten. "Do you know why?" She hesitated. "No one ever said. Only that she left something behind at the chapel." He stepped closer. "What sort of thing?" The woman shrugged. "Couldn't say. Father Donnelly might know more. He keeps the old records." "Is he here?" She shook her head. "Died 2 years ago." The silence stretched. "Thank you." Ellery said finally. "You've been very kind." As he turned to leave, the woman called after him. "If it's Anna you're seeking, best start with the McLeods. They remember everyone." Back in his room, he sat by the window and watched the rain come down in thin silver lines. The chapel, the letter, the village, they were all pieces of something he could almost see. If only he could stop remembering and start believing. He took out his notebook and began to write. Not an essay, not an argument, just fragments. Words that felt like clues. Anna, summer 1978, Robert's promise, Glen Aird, something left behind. He stared at the list until the ink blurred. Then he closed the notebook and let his head fall back against the chair. The next morning, he walked up the narrow hill toward the McLeod house. It sat at the edge of the forest, a large stone home with ivy crawling up one side. A woman in her 70s stood on the porch, hanging laundry despite the drizzle. "Mrs. McLeod?" he asked. "That depends who's asking," she said. He introduced himself, explained, briefly, that he was looking into the past of an old friend. When he said Anna's name, the woman's eyes softened. "Oh, I remember her well. Beautiful she was. Full of ideas. Stayed here the summer she worked with the university folk. You were one of them, weren't you?" He nodded. "Yes." She left in a hurry. Didn't say much. Mr. Mercer came back a month later, asked after something she'd left. He looked troubled. Ellery's pulse quickened. Did he find it? The woman frowned. He went up to the old ruins near the glen. Said she'd want it kept safe. Never told us what it was. He hesitated. "Where exactly are these ruins?" She pointed toward the north ridge. "Follow the stream till you reach the standing stones. You'll see what's left of the place." He found the path easily enough. It wound between wet pines and fields scattered with heather. The air smelled of moss and earth. Half a mile in, the trees thinned, revealing a cluster of ancient stones, what remained of a chapel or tower, long collapsed. He stepped carefully over the slick ground, the sound of water rushing nearby. The stones were carved with faint markings, symbols that looked Celtic, though age had almost erased them. Something caught his eye, a small metal box half buried near the base of the largest stone. He knelt, brushed away the dirt, and lifted it free. The lid was rusted but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a single photograph and a folded letter. The photograph was of Anna, standing in sunlight, smiling toward the camera. She looked happy, free. He turned it over. On the back, in her handwriting, "For N, in case I don't come back." His hands trembled. He unfolded the letter. "If you're reading this, Nathan, it means I was right to leave. Some truths aren't meant to be argued. They're meant to be carried. Robert understands. He'll keep the rest safe until you're ready." There was no signature, only a faint imprint of her hand, as if she had pressed it into the page before folding it away. Ellery stood for a long time, the wind lifting his hair, the rain whispering through the grass. He felt no joy, no closure, only the weight of years collapsing into a single moment. As he turned to leave, movement caught his eye at the edge of the clearing. A figure, a woman, standing just beyond the stones, watching him. He blinked, and she was gone. The air was colder now. The mist had thickened, curling around the ruins like smoke. He told himself it was imagination, the mind's old trick of dressing longing in human shape. But when he looked down, he saw fresh footprints in the mud leading back toward the path. Small, barefoot, recent. Back at the inn, the innkeeper noticed his pallor. "You've seen something," she said quietly. "Perhaps," he answered. She studied him. "The glen keeps its ghosts well fed. Best not to walk there after dark." He smiled faintly. "You believe in ghosts?" "I've lived here long enough not to decide." He thanked her and went up to his room. There, he spread Anna's letter beside Robert's. 2 messages, written years apart, pointing to the same silence. He realized then that the story wasn't finished. Robert had kept something more than a letter, something Anna had entrusted to him, and that, somehow, was now meant for Ellery. He turned on the lamp and began to write again, the pen scratching softly against the paper. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a pale moon floated above the lock like a coin dropped into water. He wrote one line before closing the notebook. "Tomorrow, I will find what Robert hid." He blew out the lamp. But long after the room went dark, the sea kept whispering at the edge of his thoughts, and somewhere in that whisper, a woman's voice seemed to answer. Chapter 3: The Hidden Room. The morning came wrapped in fog so thick it blurred the line between earth and sky. Ellery woke before dawn, unsure at first where he was. The room at the inn smelled faintly of peat smoke and damp wool, the sound of dripping rain still steady outside. He dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, like an old habit he was trying to remember. When he stepped outside, the air tasted of metal and moss. The village was quiet, its few chimneys sending up gray wisps that vanished into the low mist. He followed the road toward the lock, the map folded in his coat pocket, and his photograph pressed between its pages. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in persistence, the way certain lives refused to end until their meaning was found. Anna's had been one of those lives. At the edge of the village stood a row of stone cottages, long abandoned, their windows blank as missing eyes. Ellery paused before one that looked slightly less ruined than the rest. The roof sagged but held. The door was latched from the outside with a chain, as though someone had once tried to keep something in. He almost turned away. Then he noticed a mark carved into the lintel, a small circle within a triangle. He remembered it instantly. Anna had drawn the same symbol in her notebook years ago, during one of their late-night arguments about sacred geometry and the soul. He felt his chest tighten. He broke the rusted latch with a stone and pushed the door open. The air inside was cold and dry, carrying the faint scent of old paper and earth. Dust hung in the light that seeped through a crack in the boards. There was little furniture, a broken chair, a narrow table, a shelf with a few rotting books. He moved carefully, afraid that sound might wake whatever memory slept here. In the corner stood a wooden chest, half buried under debris. He knelt, brushed it clean, and tried the lid. Locked. He leaned closer, noticing something strange. The hinges were on the inside. The chest wasn't meant to open from here. It was meant to open from below. He searched the floor, running his hand along the boards until one shifted slightly under pressure. A loose plank. He pried it up. Beneath lay a small cavity, dry and carefully lined with cloth. Inside, a metal key, dark with age. He lifted it out, feeling its weight, heavier than it should have been. There were initials carved into the handle. "AL?" The sound of footsteps behind him made him start. He turned sharply. A man stood in the doorway, middle-aged, wiry, raincoat slick with mist. He looked both cautious and unsurprised. "Morning," the man said. "Didn't expect to see anyone in here." Ellery straightened, slipping the key into his pocket. "I might say the same to you. I'm the caretaker. Volunteer mostly. Keep the roofs from caving in. Though I suppose that one's already gone." He stepped closer, glancing at the broken latch. "You shouldn't be here, you know. Dangerous place." "I was looking for someone," Ellery said. "Anna Lowell. She lived here once." The man tilted his head. "Name's familiar. My mother talked about her. The American woman who painted the chapel wall." "Painted?" "Aye. Before she left, she spent weeks up there. Locked herself inside some nights. Said she was working on something the church wouldn't approve of." Ellery's pulse quickened. "Do you know what became of the painting?" The man shrugged. "Covered over, I think. The new vicar didn't care for modern art. But there's an old storage room under the chapel. I've never had the key." Ellery felt the key in his pocket press against his thigh. "Would you show me?" he asked. The man introduced himself as Ewan Ross. He spoke little as they walked, his boots squelching in the mud. The chapel loomed at the far end of the glen, its stone walls streaked dark by rain. Ewan led him around the side, where a low door sat almost hidden behind overgrown ivy. "Basement entrance," Ewan said. locked since before I was born. Ellery crouched, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock gave with a soft, reluctant sigh. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. They found a staircase leading down into shadow. "I'll fetch a lamp," Ewan said. When he returned, the light revealed a narrow corridor lined with shelves, most empty, some filled with decaying books and old church records. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy wooden door, painted faintly upon it, the same circle within triangle symbol. Ewan frowned. Strange thing for a church door. Ellery felt his throat dry. Yes, strange indeed. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, windowless, its walls rough stone. A single canvas stood on an easel in the center, draped with a sheet yellowed by age. Neither man spoke. Ellery reached out, lifted the cloth. The painting beneath was half finished, or perhaps half erased. Colors bled into one another like light caught underwater. Figures emerged and vanished in the texture. Faces, hands, something like a doorway opening behind them. At the bottom corner, a faint signature, Yell, 1978. Ewan whistled softly. "She painted that." "Yes," Ellery said. "She did." "What's it meant to be?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because now he remembered. He remembered Anna talking about symbols hidden in sound, about frequencies that remember. He had laughed at her then, calling it mysticism dressed in academic language. But she'd only smiled and said, "Not everything we study can be proven, Nathan. Some things only reveal themselves when you listen." And now, standing before her final work, he could almost hear something beneath the silence. A vibration, faint but persistent, like the hum of the sea in a seashell. Ewan was looking at him strangely. "You all right, sir?" "Yes." Ellery tore his gaze from the painting. "Just old memories." "Well, you found what you came for, it seems." "Perhaps." They left the chapel, locking the door behind them. As they reached the path, Ellery turned. Through the small window, he could still see the outline of the painting, glowing faintly in the lamplight. He felt sure of one thing. Robert had known about this room, and he had hidden it, not to protect Anna's reputation, but to protect something else entirely. That evening, back in his room at the inn, Ellery spread both letters on the table once more. He noticed, for the first time, a faint mark at the bottom of Robert's, a set of numbers he had assumed were a date. Now he saw they were coordinates. He unfolded the map, matched the numbers, and felt his breath catch. They pointed not to Glen Aird, but to a small island just off the coast. Eilean Mara, the locals called it. A place reachable only at low tide. He remembered the story, a hermit's retreat centuries ago, abandoned after a storm. Robert had written, "Tell her the thing she left behind is safe." Safe. On an island no one could reach half the day. He closed his eyes, the pieces aligning at last. Anna's painting was not the secret. It was the map. The next morning, Ellery found Ewan outside the inn loading tools into his truck. "Ewan," he said, "do you know how to get to Eilean Mara?" Ewan raised an eyebrow. "The tidal island? Dangerous crossing, that one. You've got maybe 2 hours between tides." "I only need one." Ewan studied him, then shrugged. "There's a path near the old pier. I can take you if you like." Ellery hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." The tide was low by midday. The path revealed itself as a slick, winding stretch of sand and stone leading toward a dark hump of land half a mile out. Ewan went first, steady and sure-footed. Ellery followed, clutching the satchel to his chest. The wind carried the cry of distant gulls and the low thunder of the sea returning. By the time they reached the island, mist was already forming on the horizon. They climbed a small rise and found the ruins of what had once been a chapel or a watchtower. Inside, half-collapsed walls and a single altar stone remained. Ewan wandered the perimeter while Ellery explored the interior. Something about the stone floor caught his attention. Faint carvings, same triangle and circle pattern. He knelt, brushing away moss. Beneath the carvings, a thin line marked the outline of a hidden compartment. He wedged his penknife into the crack, pried. The slab lifted slightly, revealing a shallow space below. Inside lay a small wooden box, sealed with wax and tied with a ribbon faded to white. "Find something?" Ewan called. Ellery nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I have." He lifted the box, feeling the weight. Light, almost empty. For a moment, he considered opening it there. Then instinct stopped him. Whatever Anna had left, she meant for him to find it alone. He turned to Ewan. "We should head back before the tide." Ewan glanced at the darkening sky. "Aye, wise choice." By the time they reached the mainland, the sea was already swallowing the path behind them. Ellery thanked Ewan and returned to the inn without explanation. He sat by the window, the unopened box before him. Outside, the storm rolled in, wind against glass, rain hammering the roof like impatient hands. He reached for the ribbon and untied it. The lid creaked open. Inside was a reel of magnetic tape, carefully wound, and a small note folded beside it. He unfolded the paper, hands trembling. "For Nathan. Listen, and you'll understand." Yell. He stared at the tape, the black ribbon coiled like a living thing. His old reel-to-reel player was still in the cottage back in Maine. There would be no listening tonight. But as thunder shook the windows, he realized that the journey, whatever it was, had only just begun. He leaned back, exhausted, the box still open on the table. The fire guttered low. Outside, the storm drowned out every sound except the sea's endless breathing. For the first time in years, Ellery smiled. Not from joy, but from the sudden, undeniable sense that the past was not finished with him yet. Chapter 4. The Voice on the Tape. The storm had passed by morning. Glen Aird woke under a new sky. Pale, rinsed clean, the lock shining like glass. Ellery stood at his window, the box open on the table behind him, sunlight catching the faint shimmer of the magnetic tape. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the long night turning over questions, none of which had answers. Why had Anna left a recording instead of a letter? Why hide it here, across the sea, waiting decades for someone who might never return? He turned from the window. The tape lay still, silent, patient. He would need the old reel-to-reel to hear it. The one in Maine. The one he hadn't used since before he retired. That, at least, was simple. He would go home. He left the inn at noon. Ewan Ross offered to drive him to Inverness, and Ellery accepted with gratitude and a certain quiet weariness. The road wound through fields bright with heather, the horizon clear now that the mist had lifted. Ewan drove in silence for a time, then said, "Whatever was on that island, you found what you were looking for, didn't you?" Ellery smiled faintly. "I found what she wanted me to find. Same thing, maybe." "No," Ellery said. "Not quite." Ewan didn't press further. Some silences deserved to remain unbroken. By the time Ellery reached Edinburgh, his body ached with fatigue. He booked a late flight back to Boston, slept uneasily on the plane, and dreamed of Anna, her hands moving over the canvas, her voice low, saying, "Listen, Nathan. Just listen." He woke as the wheels touched the runway, heart pounding as if the words had followed him across the ocean. The Maine coast looked unchanged when he returned. The same gray horizon, the same restless surf. His cottage, small and weathered, waited like a loyal animal. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and books. Dust motes turned in the light like tiny galaxies. He unpacked the wooden box, set it on the desk beside the reel-to-reel player, and hesitated. Once he played it, the mystery would no longer be a mystery. It would become something else, truth, or memory, or maybe a kind of farewell. He loaded the tape, pressed play. At first, nothing. Then, a faint hum, the static breath of old technology coming alive. And then, her voice. Soft, low, clear, unmistakable. "Hello, Nathan." He froze. "If you're hearing this," the voice continued, "then I suppose Robert kept his promise. I imagine you're older now. Wiser, perhaps. Or maybe just more tired." He laughed once, quietly. "Both," he murmured. "I won't apologize for leaving," Anna's voice said. "You wouldn't have stopped me, but you would have tried. And that would have ruined you, in the kind way only good people can be ruined." Her voice paused. He could hear faint wind in the background, maybe waves, the same sea that now broke outside his window. "You once told me that knowledge was its own kind of faith," she said. "I think I finally understand what you meant. But there are kinds of knowledge that undo the person who carries them. I was undoing. I had to go." He closed his eyes. He could see her as she had been, hair wind-tangled, eyes alive with the fire of impossible ideas. The tape crackled. Then she said, "You'll find a painting, if it still exists. The one I began at Glen Aird. It isn't finished because I couldn't finish it. What I wanted to show couldn't be seen. It could only be heard." Ellery frowned. "There's a pattern in the sound of waves. I proved it in the end. Robert helped me. The sea remembers its own echoes. It carries everything ever spoken beside it. That's what the frequencies show. That's what frightened them." The sound grew faint. A rustle. Then, quietly, "If you listen closely to the recording, Nathan, you'll hear what I heard. I left it there, hidden beneath my words. Robert knew how to find it. He'll have written it down somewhere." Static swallowed her voice for a moment. Then, "Don't look for me. I'm part of what you're hearing now. That's enough." A long pause. Then, softly, "Goodbye, my friend." The tape clicked to its end. Ellery sat motionless, the silence in the room thick as water. He replayed the last line in his mind, over and over. "You'll hear what I heard." He leaned forward, rewound the tape, pressed play again. This time, he listened beyond her voice, for the faint, almost hidden sounds beneath it. Waves, wind, and something else. A rhythm, slow, deliberate, like the pulse of a heartbeat buried in static. He turned up the volume. The pulse grew clearer, not random, but patterned. He reached for a notepad, began jotting down what he heard. Long, short, long, short. Morse code. He felt his pulse quicken. He replayed the section again, decoding as he went. The message was short. 5 words. "Look where the water ends." He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. The sea. The coast. There was only one place near the cottage where the tide never reached. A rocky outcrop at the edge of the cliffs, known to locals as the Still Point. He'd walked there hundreds of times, never noticing anything but gulls and lichen. He grabbed his coat, the recorder still humming softly behind him, and stepped out into the cold afternoon. The cliffs rose sharp and wet, the wind cutting through his sleeves. He followed the path until he reached the outcrop, a slab of granite shaped like a blade, jutting out over the restless water. The tide was rising, but not yet high. He knelt, scanning the ground. At first, nothing but stone and moss. Then he saw it. The faint outline of a carving, worn smooth by decades of salt and wind, a circle within a triangle, and a symbol. He brushed the surface with his sleeve. The symbol marked a shallow depression in the rock, like a seal. He pressed his hand against it. Something clicked beneath his palm, a soft mechanical sound, almost lost in the wind. A small section of stone lifted slightly, revealing a cavity. Inside lay a weathered tin cylinder wrapped in waxed cloth. He pulled it free, heart hammering. Back inside, he unwrapped the cylinder. Inside were several sheets of paper, yellowed but legible, filled with diagrams, circles, waveforms, handwritten notes in Anna's script. Acoustic memory field, the first page read, "If water can hold light, perhaps it can hold sound, the residue of human presence." Memory is vibration. The rest was mathematics, patterns, coordinates, equations that looped back on themselves. And at the bottom of the last page, a single note written in a different hand. She proved it. It was Robert's handwriting. Ellery sank into the chair, papers trembling in his hands. She'd done it, or believed she had. And Robert, the careful skeptic, the man of logic, had believed her too. He felt something shift inside him, not understanding exactly, but a kind of surrender. The sea outside sounded different now, as though it were speaking through her language. He thought of her words, "Don't look for me. I'm part of what you're hearing now." He turned toward the window. The tide was full, pressing against the rocks, roaring with life. He closed his eyes, and in the rhythm of the waves, he thought he heard it again. The same pulse as on the tape, soft and steady. Not Morse, not pattern, a heartbeat. He spent the next days cataloging the papers, scanning every page, listening to the tape again and again. The more he listened, the more he began to hear. Faint harmonics, low tones that rose and fell like breath. He recorded them, slowed them, layered them. Each time, the same pulse emerged. One night, as he adjusted the levels on the recorder, the pulse shifted, not in rhythm, but in tone. A pattern emerged, melodic, almost like a voice humming beneath the sound. Not words, not music, something between them. He sat still, hardly breathing. It felt like a presence, not imagined, but remembered. Anna. The next morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten, addressed to him in neat, modern script. The postmark read Boston. He opened it, heart already guessing. "Dear Dr. Ellery, it's Claire Mercer. I hope you remember me. I've found something among my father's papers that I think you should see. A series of recordings labeled Project Lowell. If these belong to the same Anna you mentioned, then I believe our fathers, yours, hers, mine, were working on the same experiment. I can bring them to you tomorrow if you're still in Maine. Claire." He read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully, set it beside the tape recorder, and stared out toward the gray line of the sea. The past, it seemed, was not done whispering. It was beginning to speak. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the water to molten glass. Ellery sat by the window, the reel-to-reel still turning silently beside him, the faint outline of Anna's voice echoing in his mind. He looked at the horizon, at the place where the water ended, and thought, for the first time, that perhaps memory was not something kept in the mind at all. Perhaps it was everywhere, waiting to be heard.